Part 1. The Boy with the Storm Cloud Eyes. Chapter 1. Year 837 to 849 PXF. Talon's childhood was privileged and mostly carefree. He was chided enough by his elders not to become a brat, but was still spoiled unendingly by the staff, especially Miss Haddington, whom he charmed endlessly with pleading hazel eyes from behind his mop of perfectly unruly hair. Talon spent his days bouncing from playing the part of the perfect student for his tutors to causing mischief around the estate, indoors and out. As he grew, his daily rounds would take him from his rooms on the sunrise wing of the estate down to the main floor, where he would tiptoe past his father's study. Talon was always sure to cause not even a single sound or vibration as he passed the thick, carved doors, to ensure he would not disturb his father's maps or the models that covered them. They were not toys. Even the voice that often spoke in Talon's mind seemed to cower and hide whenever they passed the study, which was good as it tended to constantly suggest that he do things he knew he shouldn't. His arm would still itch when he passed his father's study, a memory of the time he listened to the voice's pleas and barged in through the stately doors. Afterward, he remembered that he had been taken to the surgeon his father employed and who lived on the estate, but curiously, Talon remembered little else from that day other than entering the forbidden room. Once past the study, Talon could freely roam the parlors, library, and receiving rooms on the main floor. If there was indoor fun to be had, he usually found it there. Talon never did any of the really bad things the voice whispered for him to do. Most of those scared him and would hurt people. The lesser requests he quite enjoyed, though, stirring anger and frustration between servants and houseworkers, planting discord and causing scenes. Talon liked when their tempers would flare at each other with nowhere to go, biting their tongues for fear that father would hear a raised voice indoors. It was like when he would use one of Mrs. Grawl's sewing needles to pin a moth to the ground and watch the ants come, but with people. The biggest attraction on the main floor was the dining room. While he was only allowed to join his parents for dinner and sometimes lunch, it was where he could sneak down the servants' stairs to the kitchens. The kitchens always had activity and people coming and going. The gardeners, stable hands, groundskeepers, houndsmen, and especially the cooks always sounded so genuine in their greetings and chats with each other, not like the formalized conversations of the upper staff and his parents. Talon never did bad things to the lower staff, even though the voice sometimes begged him to. Here in the kitchens on the ground floor of the estate, the background noise of the daily running of the household eclipsed the naggings of the voice in his head, and it was one of the few places Talon found he could tell the voice a definitive no, and not just cajoling it with a maybe later, or we'll do that tomorrow. While the estate's half-elf surgeon, Balanon, technically was a part of the upper staff, Talon found him in the kitchens or hallways of the ground floor more often than not. The lower floor of the estate housed Balanon's surgery, as the laborers who worked the grounds more often needed his services than the household staff, and its location also kept any unseemly injury or illness out of the main house. Therefore, Balanon spent most of his day among lower staff instead of with the stuffy maids and butlers above. Talon found the half-elf surgeon fascinating. He had learned from his tutors that although Balanon looked far younger than his parents, the estate surgeon was actually far older than even his father's father. Balanon was always kind to Talon, and when they would cross paths in the kitchens, he would always listen to and answer whatever question or observation Talon had about nature or elvenkind. So it was not surprising that as Talon outgrew his more childish things, he became obsessed with everything involving the surgery, drawing him like a moth to a flame. The voice, usually skulkingly quiet when Talon was among the lower staff and exploring the estate grounds, seemed thrilled with this new focus on the surgery. It stoked the innate curiosity in most boys of Talon's young age for the gruesome and gory. Whenever Talon would see a gardener going to the surgery with a leg wrapped in a bloody shirt, or a houndsman cradling a hand that had been accidentally bitten while breaking up a ruckus between the hunting dogs, Talon and the voice began to imagine together what circumstance led to the incident, and how awful the wound might be. The voice would even go as far as suggesting to Talon that if a tool were left at an inconvenient place, or a poker strayed into the forge at an inopportune time, they might see even more people head to the surgery. Talon rejected the voice's plan out of habit, but it did awaken a hint of temptation in him. Its initial outright requests denied, The voice now assured Talon that Balanon always fixed whatever wound or ailment was placed before him. With Balanon's skill, it suggested, it's almost as though these injuries and wounds were merely pretend, just like other imaginings. Surely anything they caused would be just the same. Talon wasn't convinced and wanted to see for himself before deciding on what the voice had suggested, but he couldn't get near the surgery whenever Balanon was treating someone. He once tried to get in under the guise of helping by escorting one of Miss Haddington's cooks to treatment after they had sliced open their palm, but Balanon shooed him away before he could even get a good look in the door. Talon was supremely frustrated by the chiding of, "Let the adults take care of this," the surgery door closing in his face. "Perhaps if there were more injured people," the voice chimed in, "they would need his help." Talon almost gave in to the voice then and there, and could feel its glee at his acquiescence. But the smell of Miss Haddington's ginger cookies baking in the kitchen distracted him and drowned out the voice's influence for a time. Not 2 days later, as Talon was sitting at the kitchen's small plain wooden table, effectively ruining his dinner with a snack provided by Miss Haddington, Balanon approached and sat beside him. "Your mother has observed your interest in the surgery," he began in his lilting voice. Talon almost choked on his milk. His mother never took any interest in him. Did she know about what he and the voice had been planning? Was he in trouble? Balanon continued. "She wants you to spend 1 day a week learning medicine with me." Talon's heart leaped in his chest, his body quickly following as he jumped from his seat. "Really?" "Yes, we begin tomorrow." The surgery was not at all what Talon had imagined, or the voice had claimed it would be. Talon threw up no less than 3 times before lunch, just from Balanon showing Talon some basics on a preserved pig he had for teaching. However, the most memorable lesson came that afternoon when one of the stable hands was carried in after a plow horse had stomped on his foot. "Come here for a moment, Talon. This is important," Balanon stated as he waved Talon over to the treatment table where he was preparing his patient. Talon approached and saw the damage the horse had done as they took off the stable hand's shoe. His foot wasn't at all the shape it should have been, and the toes splayed out at odd angles. As Talon got closer, he noted that the stable hand was still biting down with all his might on the leather belt that had been placed between his teeth when he was brought in, but it could not suppress all the cries he made from the pain. The voice jumped front and center in Talon's mind, gleefully observing what was happening, but Talon wasn't sure what to think. This wasn't the fun grossness he was expecting or imagined. This was real. "Give me your hand, Talon," Balanon said in the gentle manner of physicians everywhere that seemed to elicit instinctive compliance from Talon without thought. Talon, eyes still locked on the stable hand's ashen face and wide eyes, did not hear as Balanon mumbled a few words or see the arcane spark that ignited with them as he placed Talon's hand on the stable hand's wrist. Talon's physical form was frozen, but in his mind, in a dizzying flash of arcane energy, became one with the stable hand. He was on the table, seeing his own ruined foot and feeling the excruciating pain. Talon knew the stable hand's fears and suddenly also his name, Gavin. All the uncertainty that filled Gavin was now Talon's to know. Would he ever walk normally again? Would he walk at all? Were they going to cut off his foot? Everything he saw and felt, physically and mentally, mirrored from Gavin to Talon perfectly. He even saw his own frozen body with his hand on Gavin's wrist, and looking at his own face, Talon was sickened by what he saw. The voice had contorted Talon's face into a mask of malevolent joy. Talon realized Gavin saw it too, and that the stable hand was both afraid and disgusted by it, adding to his already sizable distress. Talon tried to call out to Gavin, explained that it wasn't truly him with the insidious grin. It was the voice. His pleas fell flat, though, and the realization dawned that he could not communicate with his host while in this state. Balanon left Talon under the spell's influence for the entire procedure required to set and repair the stable hand's foot. While Talon experienced some of the pain-numbing effects of the medicines given to Gavin, he did not share the same mental daze the patient did. Talon was fully aware of every step Balanon did, and Balanon, knowing Gavin was unconscious, but Talon's mind remained awake within him, spoke to Talon as he worked. The surgeon dutifully taught his student the procedure and explained what he was doing, why it was necessary, and the pain it would cause, which Talon still felt, even if to a reduced effect. When the procedure was over, Balanon looked straight at Gavin, but directed his words to Talon firmly, stating, "You must always consider what pain and distress your actions may cause to others. One day the roles may be reversed, where you are in dire need, and they are the one with the ability to help or harm you." Balanon released Talon from the spell. He scrambled to his senses, then bolted from the surgery, not wanting to face Gavin, Balanon, or himself. Talon was furious with the voice, screaming at it in his head. It was the first time he had ever confronted the voice directly. Everything it had told him was wrong. All these things it wanted him to do were not a game. Even if Balanon fixed them, the people they hurt would still have the pain and fear of the event as it happened. That was not something someone could forget. On top of that, how dare the voice get so much happiness out of that? Talon threw the image of his sinisterly smiling face from the surgery at the place where he felt the voice resided in his mind. The voice, which had respectfully cowered at Talon's fury, now slyly slunk back into his consciousness, simply pointing out it was his own face smiling that way and no one else's. Talon's fury deflated instantly. He had no counter to that. He and his actions brought him to that moment. Talon did have an answer to it, though. He wouldn't let it happen again. Talon learned another valuable lesson over the following week. Sometimes you can't undo your previous actions when it comes to people. Try as he might, he found Gavin avoided him like the plague. No matter how kind or considerate or helpful he was, the stable hand wanted no part of it. He felt hurt by the rejection, and the voice tried to twist it into an opportunity for retaliation, but Talon resolutely determined that he wouldn't be listening to the voice for quite some time. Talon continued his weekly training in the surgery, but now with a whole new perspective untainted by the voice's desire to see and revel in whatever injury may come along. He was there to learn to help people. Another thing Talon discovered from his continuing time in the surgery was that a cloaked man delivered 5 healing potions to Balanon every fortnight or so. At first, Talon, who was not overly familiar with magic, just assumed that the potions must not be very effective, or were for ailments more than wounds, and that Balanon must be using them on the days he was not there. However, the laborers whose injuries Balanon treated still exited the surgery with slings, stitches, or bandages, just as they did on the days he worked there. It wasn't until after some subtle inquiries over the course of several months that Talon discovered just how powerful healing magics and potions could be. Still, Balanon never seemed to use them on the staff or laborers. Instead, he always used traditional, non-magical medical procedures. So where were all the healing potions going? It was quite by accident that Talon discovered his mother was using them, which made no sense to him at all. His mother never did much of anything, to the point where Talon never even thought of her much anymore. There had been a time when he was younger when Talon thought his mother was the most beautiful woman in the world, and all he wanted was to be near her as often as possible. Whenever he would try to get close to her, though, she would ignore him for one of her ever-present books, sternly telling him, "Can't you see I'm reading?" Talon quickly learned that there was never a time when she was not reading when it came to him. Sitting as still as a statue in her parlor, silhouetted by the sun coming in through the window in her high-backed chair, she gave not even the slightest hint of emotion or care to Talon. In frustration and rejection, Talon found he stopped caring for her as well. Talon only discovered his mother's use of the potions because he had lost his favorite pen and, after tearing apart his room to find it, determined it must have ended up in the garbage. Digging about in the rubbish pile behind the estate before it was carted away, he found the empty potion bottle among other refuse from his mother's room. Talon never did figure out why she was using so many of them until much later in life. Young Talon knew his mother was not clumsy. She was, in fact, very graceful. But in the innocence of his youth, he could not comprehend how she would need healing potions so often when the only time she was not alone and in her parlor was when she was with his father.